unpaid wages, scarce grains, desperate families. The land of Egypt, once a symbol of stability and plenty, was about to become a picture of complete bankruptcy. No war, no plague, just the worst shortage the empire had ever faced. And at the center of it all, an unlikely figure, a former Hebrew slave who had been forgotten in a prison. His name? Jose. The importance of this story goes far beyond its spiritual dimension. It is an impressive study of public administration, economic forecasting, and survival strategies in extreme contexts. More than a miracle or an inspiring story, what happened in Egypt at that time was, in fact, the greatest financial scheme recorded in Scripture. An economic operation that saved an entire nation from total ruin. But what transformed Joseph from a prisoner to the most powerful economic minister in the ancient world? What was the method behind your impressive retrenchment and financial reconstruction strategy? How could someone who was neither Egyptian, nor noble, nor part of the elite, take control of the national economy at one of the most critical moments in the history of the Middle East? If you like content that combines history, strategy, and the Bible in depth, subscribe to the channel. Here, each video is an investigation that reveals forgotten layers of the past and unexpected connections with the present. Before answering these questions, it is necessary to understand Egypt and its economic and political structure around the 16th century BC. The Egyptian civilization, established around the Nile River, depended completely on the annual flood cycle to fertilize its lands. Agriculture was the engine of the entire economy, and the centralized state dominated the distribution and storage of food. The pharaoh, considered a living god, not only led politically, but was also the personification of cosmic order. Any agricultural crisis, therefore, was also a spiritual, political, and moral crisis. In this context, Egypt functioned as a centralizing machine. All agricultural surplus was collected as tribute and stored in government granaries. These reserves were redistributed in a controlled manner during periods of scarcity. However, what was coming was no ordinary shortage. It was a prolonged climate collapse, a structural break in the main gear of the Egyptian economy. The interpretation of Pharaoh's dream, with the 7 fat cows and the 7 lean cows, was not just a symbolic or religious reading. It was, in practice, a warning that the economic system would go bankrupt if nothing was done. The Egyptian court, sophisticated as it was, did not seem to have practical answers. The priests failed to provide concrete solutions. The counselors did not know how to reverse the scenario. It took more than riddles or prayers. It took a plan. It was at this moment that Joseph was called before Pharaoh. Until then, he was just a Hebrew arrested on a false accusation. But he carried with him 2 rare credentials: the ability to interpret dreams accurately, and the experience of having been a manager in Potiphar's house and in prison, roles in which he learned to manage resources in adverse scenarios. Upon hearing the dream, Jose did not just interpret it. He immediately offered a proposal. A multi-layered plan: create a compulsory collection network during the years of plenty, build efficient storage centers, and appoint an administrator to coordinate the entire operation. The plan was not just strategic, it was visionary. It wasn't just about storing food, but about anticipating the behavior of people, the market, and nature itself in the face of scarcity. It was behavioral economics before the term even existed. Pharaoh's response was immediate. There was no deliberation among the counselors, nor resistance from the administrative elite. The clarity with which Jose articulated the problem and presented a solution made the monarch see something rare in him: competence combined with spiritual sensitivity. Instead of just following the suggested plan, the pharaoh did something even more radical. He granted Joseph the 2nd highest position in all of Egypt, giving him the royal ring, a symbol of executive authority. From forgotten prisoner to chancellor of the empire in a single day. But what might seem like a sudden leap was actually the logical outcome of years of observation, invisible work, and strategic intelligence cultivated in adversity. With full authority, Jose began implementing the plan. He established collection points in all cities, ordering that a significant part of the production be collected annually during the years of plenty. This compulsory tax on abundance was accepted, at least in part because it came as a decree from the pharaoh himself, and any challenge to the pharaoh was seen as an offense to the cosmic order. Furthermore, the abundance was such that the Egyptians were unable to estimate the future risk. Jose counted on a determining factor: the illusion of permanence. In good times, scarcity seems a distant impossibility. The grains were stored in such large quantities that, according to the biblical account, there came a time when the scribes stopped recording. Such was the abundance stored. But Jose knew that storing was just one layer. It was necessary to preserve the grains, organize logistics, create safe routes, and prevent the system from collapsing under its own complexity. Egypt became a huge, decentralized storage system with control centers that fed reports and supplied regions according to strict criteria. For the first time, abundance was treated as an opportunity for structuring and not as a justification for waste. When the 7 years of plenty came to an end, there was no immediate collapse. The first year of shortages was silent. The Nile no longer flooded as before, and the land lost its fertility. The population felt that something had changed, but they still did not understand the scale of the transition. It was only in the second year that the impact became evident. Plantations failed, trade slowed, and families began to abandon their land in search of food. The system proposed by Jose went from a strategic project to a line of survival. The accumulated grains began to be sold to the people, not donated, which allowed the system to be maintained and imposed recognition of state authority on the population. Jose didn't just manage a logistical plan, he shaped, little by little, a new social structure. The population, previously autonomous in their properties and businesses, now depended directly on the state to survive. What was born as an emergency operation became a tool for national reorganization, where power was centralized, and the class structure underwent a slow but irreversible transformation. As the famine intensified, the system set up by Joseph proved not only functional but also dominant. Egypt became the only pole of stability in a region in collapse. Neighboring people, affected by the same shortage, began to move towards the Egyptian borders. What was once just an internal containment plan became a foreign policy of continental reach. Jose had, in fact, created a food monopoly. And with that, he controlled something even more valuable than gold: survival. As the years progressed, the Egyptian population found itself faced with a dilemma: either give up what they had or die of hunger. When the money ran out, people gave up their animals. When the animals were no longer enough, they offered their land. At the end of the process, the Egyptians themselves sold themselves in exchange for sustenance. The centralization of economic power in the hands of the state, with Jose as executor, completely reconfigured the structure of society. Everyone, with the exception of the priests, became directly dependent on the pharaoh. The old rural nobility was dissolved. Private property annulled. Servitude became the rule. The Bible reports that Joseph not only accepted these exchanges, but also formalized the new system. The Egyptians became servants of the state, cultivating the lands that were previously theirs and delivering part of the production to the pharaoh as tribute. In modern terms, Jose introduced a reverse agrarian reform, transferring the means of production from the people to the government in the name of collective survival. It was the price of stability. It was the cost of avoiding total collapse. Interestingly, there are no records of popular revolts against Jose during this period. Hunger had nullified resistance. The alternative to submission was collapse. And in this new model, he didn't just keep order, he saved lives. Joseph did not present himself as a tyrant. His figure was that of the faithful administrator, the just man faced with an inevitable crisis. This made him respected, not feared. Still, the system that was being consolidated was undeniably authoritarian. Centralization, although effective, concentrated power to unprecedented levels. Jose had become the architect of a new national economy, where each citizen became part of the state's machinery, driven by necessity and not by choice. Amid this scenario, the reunion with his brothers takes place in an almost cinematic way. Jacob's sons, nomadic shepherds from the land of Canaan, were also victims of famine and came to Egypt in search of food. Without knowing that the governor before them was their own brother sold years before, they bowed before Joseph unknowingly, fulfilling the dream that had isolated him and led him to that point. The family drama, although intense, does not paralyze the narrative. On the contrary, it adds a symbolic layer to what was at stake: forgiveness, reconciliation, but also the reaffirmation of a leadership forged in pain and sustained by a vision that others were unable to see. The reunion with the family did not just mean an emotional outcome. It was also a political movement of great proportions. Joseph, by revealing his identity, not only forgave his brothers, he guaranteed them a position of privilege within the Egyptian system that he himself had created. The land of Goshen, fertile and strategic, was granted to his family by direct recommendation to the pharaoh. The Hebrews, a small and pastoral ethnic group, were now located in one of the most productive regions of the empire, under state protection and with direct access to high command. It was more than a family reunion. It was the beginning of a coexistence between two worlds, the Semitic and the Egyptian, that would shape the following centuries. This move, however, has profound implications. Joseph, still faithful to the roots of his lineage and the alliance with the God of his parents, established a new type of coexistence. He was up to his neck in the pagan structure of Egypt, commanded an economic system based on state servitude, but did not break with his spiritual identity. His speech to his brothers makes it clear. It was God who sent him ahead of them to preserve lives. For Joseph, there was no contradiction between being the architect of an authoritarian system and the instrument of a divine purpose. This ethical tension is one of the most challenging in the entire biblical narrative. To what extent does survival justify extreme concentration of power? How far does the legitimacy of a successful plan go when it completely redefines the freedom of a people? Hosea's operation is not only admirable for its success, it is disconcerting in its implications. He saved a nation and, at the same time, redefined the concept of citizenship in Egypt. He created a model of dependence that guaranteed order, but eliminated autonomy. His management was effective, precise, and visionary, but the price paid was high, and he knew it. The Bible does not omit or celebrate in a simplistic way, just reports. It leaves the reader with the challenge of interpretation. Over time, the Hebrews prospered in Goshen. They multiplied, became rich, and became a large group within Egypt. But that same centralized structure, created to save, would one day turn against them. A new pharaoh, who did not know Joseph, would transform privilege into oppression. What had been refuge became captivity. This shows that systems, no matter how effective they are, depend on who manages them. Hosea's legacy, as brilliant as it was not immune to the corruption of time.